Welcome to Story Tales. Please like this video and subscribe to Story Tales. I hope you enjoy the story. Let's begin.
The kitchen smelled like burnt toast and disappointment. Cassidy Harlow sat at the scratched wooden table, watching her mother Dolores fuss over Lance's football uniform, while her father Martin counted bills with increasing agitation. "This jersey costs more than our grocery budget," Martin muttered, but his tone held no real complaint. Not when it came to Lance. Cass pushed her cereal around the bowl. The milk had gone sour 2 days ago, but nobody noticed. Nobody cared what she ate for breakfast. "Lance needs to look his best for the Scouts," Dolores said, smoothing wrinkles from the fabric. "This could be his ticket to college." "What about my debate team fees?" Cass asked. The room went quiet. Martin looked up from his calculator, his face twisting into familiar irritation. "Debate team doesn't win scholarships," he said. "Lance will be the one to take this family forward. You just manage." The words hit Cass like ice water. She'd heard variations of this speech since she was 12, but it never stopped stinging. Lance, 3 years younger, got everything. New clothes, tutoring, sports equipment, driving lessons. Cass got hand-me-downs and lectures about being grateful. "I could get academic scholarships," Cass said quietly. "With what grades?" Dolores laughed, not looking up from Lance's uniform. "You're barely keeping up with your classes." That was a lie. Cass had a 3.8 GPA despite working 20 hours a week at the local diner. But facts didn't matter in the Harlow house. Only Lance's future mattered. "Besides," Martin added, "we can't afford to split our attention. Lance has real potential." Cass stood up, her chair scraping against the worn linoleum. "I'm going to work." "Make sure you're back by 6, Dolores called after her. "I need you to watch Lance while we go to the parent meeting." Of course, even at 15, Cass was the built-in babysitter for her 18-year-old brother. The suburb looked worse in daylight. Broken fences, peeling paint, cars on blocks in driveways. The Harlow house fit right in with its sagging porch and cracked foundation. But 3 blocks over, where the newer development started, the houses gleamed with fresh paint and manicured lawns. Someday, Cass thought, someday she'd live somewhere that didn't smell like mildew and broken dreams. Work was refuge. At Murphy's Diner, Cass could focus on simple tasks. Take orders, pour coffee, clear tables. Customers tipped her well because she was quick and polite. More importantly, nobody treated her like an afterthought. "You're early again," said Rita, the day manager. Rita was 65 with silver hair and kind eyes. She'd hired Cass despite her age, seeing something hungry and determined in the teenager. "Couldn't sleep," Cass said, tying her apron. "Trouble at home?" Cass shrugged. Rita asked this question at least twice a week, and Cass never gave a real answer. What was the point? Adults heard what they wanted to hear. The lunch rush kept her busy until 3. Tips were good $37, added to her morning shift at the grocery store. She'd made $62 that day. Most of it would go toward rent and groceries. Her parents took 40% of everything she earned for household expenses. The house was empty when she got home. Lance was at practice, her parents at work. Cass climbed the stairs to her room, really the converted attic that barely qualified as living space. The ceiling sloped so low she had to duck near the walls. In winter, she could see her breath. In summer, the temperature reached 90 degrees by noon. She pulled out her notebook and calculated her earnings for the week. $215, minus what her parents took. She'd have about $130. Enough to buy the textbook she needed for history class and put a little away for college applications. Cass had been saving for college since she was 13. Not because her parents encouraged it, but because she'd overheard Martin telling Uncle Ray that Cass would probably end up pregnant and working retail like her cousin Jenny. The dismissal in his voice had lit a fire in her that still burned bright 2 years later. Footsteps thundered up the stairs. Lance burst into her room without knocking, holding a piece of paper. "Dad says you need to give me $50 for new cleats," he announced. Cass looked up from her notebook. "Ask Dad for $50. He says you're the one earning money." Lance dropped into her desk chair, making it creak ominously. Everything in her room was second-hand and fragile. "I earned that money at work." "So, we're family. You're supposed to help out." The entitlement in his voice made her stomach turn. Lance had never worked a day in his life. He didn't even do chores around the house. His only responsibility was playing football and maintaining grades good enough to stay on the team. "Get a job," Cass said. Lance laughed. "I don't have time for a job. I have practice every day and games on weekends. Dad says football is my job." "Then Dad can buy your cleats." "Come on, Cass. Don't be selfish." Selfish. The word followed her everywhere in this house. Selfish for wanting her own money. Selfish for applying to colleges they couldn't afford. Selfish for not sacrificing everything for Lance's dreams. The answer is no. Lance's face darkened. "I'll tell Dad you're being difficult." "Tell him whatever you want." He stomped out, his footsteps echoing through the thin walls. Cass knew she'd pay for this later, but she didn't care. Every dollar she gave up now was a dollar she couldn't use to escape this place. Dinner was tense. Martin carved the pot roast with aggressive precision, while Dolores served vegetables with theatrical size. Lance ate sullenly, shooting accusing looks at Cass across the table. "I hear you won't help your brother with equipment costs," Martin said finally. "I need my money for school supplies." What school supplies cost $50? Cass could have listed them. Textbooks, notebooks, pens, calculator batteries, lunch money for days when she couldn't pack from home. Instead, she said, "I'm saving for college applications." Martin's knife paused against his plate. "College applications." "Yes." "With what money?" "You think we can afford college?" "I'll get scholarships." Dolores made a dismissive noise. "Scholarships are for kids like Lance. Athletes. You're just average." Average. Another favorite word in the Harlow vocabulary. Cass wasn't average at anything, but admitting her achievements would mean acknowledging they'd been ignoring her potential for years. "I have good grades," Cass said. "Good enough for community college, maybe," Martin said. "But Lance has Division I potential. His future matters more than your fantasies." The room fell silent except for the scrape of forks against plates. Cass chewed her food, mechanically, tasting nothing. This conversation happened every few months, with slight variations. Lance needed something. Cass had to provide it. End of discussion. After dinner, Cass washed dishes while her parents drove Lance to a team meeting. The house felt peaceful without them. No tension, no demands, no casual cruelty disguised as practical advice. She was drying the last plate when they returned. Lance went straight to his room, but her parents lingered in the kitchen. "We talked to Coach Morrison tonight," Martin said. "He thinks Lance could get a full ride to Indiana State." "That's wonderful," Cass said, hanging up the dish towel. "It is wonderful, which is why everyone needs to make sacrifices to help him succeed." "Here it comes," Cass thought. "You're going to give Lance the money for those cleats," Dolores said. "And next month, when he needs new training gear, you'll help with that too." "I already told him no." Martin's face reddened. "You don't get to tell us no. This is our house, our rules. You live here, you contribute." "I do contribute. 40% of everything I earn goes to household expenses, and the rest should go to helping your family succeed." "What about my success?" The question hung in the air like smoke. Martin and Dolores exchanged a look that said everything. They'd never considered Cass a success. It wasn't part of their plan. "Your success," Martin said slowly, "is making sure Lance reaches his potential. Your role in this family is support. What if I don't want that role? Then you can find somewhere else to live. The threat was casual, delivered like a weather report. But Cass felt its weight. She was 15. She had a part-time job and maybe $400 in savings. Where could she go? But even as the fear crept in, something else stirred. Something harder and more determined. Maybe I will, she said quietly. Martin laughed. Right. And live where? Do what? You're a kid, Cass. You need us. No, Cass said, meeting his eyes. You need me. For babysitting, for money, for someone to blame when things go wrong. But I don't need this. She turned and walked toward the stairs, but Martin's voice followed her. If you walk away from this family, don't expect to come crawling back when reality hits. Cass paused on the bottom step. I won't be crawling anywhere. 3 weeks later, she proved it. The final argument started over $47. Lance needed a new equipment bag, and Martin decided Cass should pay for it. By then, the demands had escalated. First the cleats, then training supplements, then a team dinner contribution. Every week brought a new expense that somehow became her responsibility. I need that money for my SAT prep book, Cass said. SATs are optional, Dolores replied. Lance's equipment is necessary. Optional for who? Not for me. Martin slammed his coffee mug on the counter. Everything is about you, isn't it? Your tests, your college dreams, your future. What about Lance's future? What about mine? You don't have one. The words exploded out of him. You're ordinary, Cass. Average. Lance is special. He has talent. He has potential. You're just taking up space. The kitchen went dead quiet. Even Lance, who'd been scrolling through his phone, looked up with surprise. Martin had said cruel things before, but never with such venom. Cass felt something crack inside her chest. Not break, exactly. More like a fault line shifting, creating new geography in her emotional landscape. Taking up space, she repeated. I didn't mean. Martin started. Yes, you did. Cass's voice was calm, almost detached. You meant every word. She walked upstairs to her room and pulled a duffel bag from under her bed. The bag she'd bought 3 months ago when the demands first started escalating. She'd hoped she wouldn't need it, but hope was a luxury she couldn't afford anymore. Clothes went in first. Not many. She only owned 3 pairs of jeans and a handful of shirts. Her work uniforms, a warm jacket, the notebook where she tracked her earnings and expenses, the small stack of cash she'd hidden in a hollowed-out book, footsteps on the stairs. Dolores appeared in the doorway, looking flustered. What are you doing? Leaving. Don't be dramatic. Your father was just frustrated. Cass zipped the bag shut. He was honest. You can't just leave. You're 15. Watch me. She pushed past her mother and headed downstairs. Martin stood in the living room, arms crossed, blocking the front door. You're not going anywhere. Move. This is ridiculous. You'll be back by dinner. Cass set down her bag and pulled out her phone. I'm calling Rita. She said if I ever needed a place to stay, I could use her couch. Martin's confidence wavered. You'd rather live with strangers than your own family? You're not my family. Families don't treat each other like this. We clothed you, fed you, put a roof over your head. I clothed myself. I bought my own food. I paid rent to live in your attic. Cass picked up her bag again. And now I'm leaving. If you walk out that door, you're not welcome back. Cass looked around the living room one last time, at the water-stained ceiling, the worn furniture, the family photos that featured Lance prominently and her barely at all, at the home that had never felt like home. Good, she said, and walked out. The October air was crisp and clean. Cass breathed it in as she walked down the street, her bag slung over her shoulder. Behind her, the house receded until it was just another shabby building in a neighborhood full of them. She didn't look back. 12 years later, Cassidy Harlow stood in the kitchen of her own house, brewing coffee in a machine that cost more than her family used to spend on groceries in a month. Sunlight streamed through windows she'd installed herself, casting warm geometric patterns across hardwood floors she'd refinished by hand. The house was perfect. A 1920s craftsman bungalow in Bloomington's Elm Heights neighborhood, with built-in bookshelves, original crown molding, and a deep front porch where she could sit in the evenings and watch the world go by. She'd bought it 6 months ago, paying cash after years of careful saving and strategic investment. T27. Cass had everything she dreamed of during those cold nights on Rita's couch. A career in financial planning that utilized her natural talent for numbers and long-term strategy. A home that belonged to her alone. A life built entirely through her own effort. The coffee maker chimed, pulling her from her thoughts. She poured a cup and checked her phone. 3 missed calls from a number she didn't recognize, but the area code was familiar. Indianapolis. Probably a telemarketer, she decided, and deleted the notifications without listening to the voicemails. Her laptop sat open on the kitchen island, displaying client portfolios and investment projections. Saturdays were for catch-up work, reviewing accounts and preparing for the week ahead. Success demanded discipline, and discipline had become second nature. The doorbell rang. Cass frowned. She wasn't expecting anyone, and her neighbors knew better than to drop by unannounced. She liked her privacy, kept her personal life separate from work relationships, and maintained friendly but distant connections with the people on her street. Through the front window, she saw a familiar figure on her porch, taller than she remembered, broader in the shoulders, but unmistakably Lance. Her brother looked around nervously, running a hand through hair that had thinned since she'd seen him last. Cass didn't move from the window. She watched Lance ring the bell again, then peer through the glass panels beside the door. When he spotted her, his face broke into a grin that looked forced and desperate. "Cass, I can see you in there." She considered her options. Ignore him until he left. Call the police. Or open the door and find out what he wanted after 12 years of silence. Curiosity won. "Lance." She opened the door, but didn't invite him in. "How did you find me?" "I asked around. Someone at your old job gave me your address." He looked past her into the house, and she saw his eyes widen. "Wow, this place is incredible. What do you want?" The directness caught him off guard. He'd probably expected pleasantries, maybe even a hug. But Cass had learned not to waste time on social niceties with people who'd proven they didn't deserve them. "Can I come in? It's kind of personal. We can talk here." Lance glanced around the porch, noting the expensive furniture and decorative planters. "You've done really well for yourself." "Yes, I have. I mean really well. This neighborhood is incredible. These houses must cost. What do you want, Lance?" He shifted uncomfortably. "I wanted to see you. To catch up. It's been 12 years, Cass. We're family." "No, we're not." The words hit him like a physical blow. His mouth opened and closed soundlessly before he found his voice. "Of course we are. You're my sister. Sisters get treated like family. I was treated like a bank account with legs." "That's not fair." "Fair." Cass almost laughed. "You want to talk about fair? Where were you when I was sleeping on couches and working 3 jobs to finish high school? Where were you when I was eating ramen for 6 months straight to save for college applications? I was just a kid. You were 18 when I left, old enough to know right from wrong, old enough to stand up for me." Cass leaned against the doorframe, studying his face. "But you didn't, did you? You just let them treat me like garbage because it meant more attention for you." Lance's confident facade cracked. "Look, I know things weren't great back then, but we're adults now. We can start over." "Why would I want to start over with someone who helped make my childhood miserable?" "I didn't help make anything miserable. I was just trying to survive too. By taking everything and giving nothing back. By letting Mom and Dad use me as your personal ATM. Cass felt her control slipping and tightened her grip on the door. Do you know what I remember about you, Lance? Watching you eat steak while I ate hot dogs. Watching you get new clothes while I wore thrift store cast-offs. Watching you take my hard-earned money and never once saying thank you. That wasn't my fault. That was Mom and Dad's decision. And you went along with it because it benefited you. The silence stretched between them. Lance stared at his shoes, while Cass waited for him to say something that might justify the 12 years of absence. Something that might explain why he'd suddenly appeared on her doorstep. Finally, he looked up. I need help. There it was. The real reason for his visit. What kind of help? I'm having some money problems. Lost my job a few months ago. Can't make rent. I thought maybe you could loan me some cash. Just until I get back on my feet. Cass stared at him. After 12 years, this was what brought him to her door. Not curiosity about her life. Not genuine desire to reconnect. Just the same old dynamic. Lance needed something, so he came to Cass. How much? Hope flickered in his eyes. Just a few thousand. I know it's a lot, but looking at this place, you're obviously doing great. And I promise I'll pay you back. What happened to football? I thought you were going to get a full ride to Indiana State. Lance's face darkened. That didn't work out. Why not? I got injured senior year. Torn ACL. Lost my scholarship. So you went to college anyway. For a while. But without the scholarship, it was too expensive. I dropped out junior year. And since then, I've had jobs. Construction mostly. But the economy's been tough. Contractors aren't hiring. Cass processed this information. The golden boy, the chosen one, the future of the Harlow family had flamed out spectacularly. The irony would have been funny if it weren't so predictable. What do Mom and Dad think about this situation? They think it's your fault. The words hung in the air like a bad smell. Cass felt her jaw clench. My fault how exactly? They say if you hadn't hogged all the luck, I'd be somewhere by now. That you being selfish messed up the family dynamic. The family dynamic was already messed up. I just refused to enable it. They say you undermined their authority. Made them look like bad parents. Cass laughed, a sound devoid of humor. They made themselves look like bad parents. I just stopped pretending otherwise. Lance shifted nervously. Look, I don't want to get into all that ancient history. I just need some help getting back on my feet. From the sister you never once contacted in 12 years. I didn't know how to reach you. You found me easily enough when you needed money. That's not. I mean, I've thought about you over the years. Wondered how you were doing. But not enough to actually find out. Lance's face reddened. This isn't going how I thought it would. How did you think it would go? That I'd be so grateful to see you, I'd write you a check, and we'd live happily ever after. I thought you might have missed your family. I don't miss people who treated me like dirt. The conversation was over, and they both knew it. Lance made one last desperate attempt. Come on, Cass. We're blood. Family helps family. You're absolutely right, Cass said. Family does help family. They support each other. They sacrifice for each other. They don't take and take and take without ever giving back. She stepped backward into her house. You're not my family, Lance. You forfeited that right a long time ago. Please, Cass. I'm desperate here. Then get a job. Any job. Work your way up. Figure it out. She paused in the doorway. Do what I did when I was 15 years old. I can't. Yes, you can. You just don't want to. Cass started to close the door, then stopped. And Lance? Don't come here again. Next time I'll call the police. She shut the door and turned the deadbolt with a decisive click. Through the window, She watched Lance stand on her porch for several minutes, probably hoping she'd change her mind. Eventually, he walked away, his shoulders slumped in defeat. Cass returned to her coffee and laptop, but concentration proved impossible. Seeing Lance had stirred up memories she'd spent years processing and filing away. The casual cruelty of her childhood, the gradual realization that her family saw her as a resource rather than a person. The moment she'd finally found the strength to walk away, her phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. "This isn't over. You owe us." Lance apparently wasn't done trying. Cass deleted the message and blocked the number. She'd learned long ago that some people never changed. They just got older and more desperate. The invitation arrived on ivory cardstock with gold script lettering. The Harlow family annual barbecue, it proclaimed, as if their backyard gatherings were social events worthy of formal announcement. Below the fancy text, someone had scrawled, "Please come, we miss you," in Dolores's distinctive handwriting. Cass almost threw it away without reading the details. But something made her pause. Curiosity, maybe, or the desire to see how far the family mythology had drifted from reality. The barbecue was set for Sunday afternoon at her parents' house. The same house she'd left 12 years ago, though the invitation listed a different address. Apparently, they'd moved to a better neighborhood. Interesting, she hadn't planned to go. Had no desire to spend an afternoon surrounded by relatives who'd either ignored her or actively participated in her mistreatment. But Lance's unexpected visit 3 weeks earlier had left her unsettled. If her family was making overtures, she wanted to know why. Sunday morning found her standing in front of her bedroom mirror, choosing an outfit with strategic precision. The navy dress was expensive but understated, paired with pearl earrings and low heels. Professional, successful, but not flashy. She wanted to project quiet confidence, not defensive wealth. The drive to her parents' new house took 40 minutes through increasingly affluent neighborhoods. When she finally pulled into the driveway, Cass had to admire their taste. The colonial-style home sat on a manicured lot with mature trees and professional landscaping, a significant upgrade from their old place. Cars lined the street. Uncle Ray's pickup truck, Aunt Margot's sedan, several vehicles she didn't recognize. The Harlow family had apparently grown during her absence. Voices and laughter drifted from the backyard. Cass walked around the side of the house, following a stone path bordered by carefully tended flower beds. Someone had invested serious money in this property. The backyard was impressive. Expansive lawn, built-in grill, covered patio with outdoor furniture that looked fresh from a showroom. Martin stood by the grill, wearing an apron that read Grill Master, and holding court with several men Cass didn't recognize. Dolores fluttered between clusters of women, refilling drinks and directing conversations. Lance sat at a picnic table with a beer, looking sullen. When he spotted Cass, his expression shifted to something between hope and resentment. "Cassidy." Dolores's voice cut across the yard. "You came." Heads turned. Conversations paused. Cass felt the weight of multiple stares as she made her way across the lawn. Some faces were familiar. Others belonged to strangers who'd apparently heard stories about the prodigal daughter. "Hello, Mom." Dolores embraced her with theatrical warmth, the kind of hug designed for an audience. "You look wonderful." "Doesn't she look wonderful, Martin?" Martin approached with his spatula still in hand. His hair had gone completely gray, and he developed the soft middle that came with sedentary prosperity. When he smiled, it didn't reach his eyes. "Cass, good to see you." "Martin, your mother's been wanting to invite you for months. We're so glad you could make it." The lie was delivered, smoothly practiced. Cass wondered how long they'd been perfecting this narrative of the loving parents who missed their estranged daughter. "Let me introduce you around," Dolores said, taking her arm. "So many people have been wanting to meet you." The next hour passed in a blur of small talk and careful questioning. Relatives she barely remembered asked about her job, her house, her love life. The questions felt like reconnaissance, gathering intelligence for some unknown purpose. Uncle Ray was there, grayer and more bitter than she remembered. He managed a curt nod when they were reintroduced, but said nothing else. Aunt Margot, Dolores' sister, was warmer. She'd always been the family diplomat, skilled at navigating the complicated dynamics without taking sides. "I'm proud of you," Margot whispered during a quiet moment. "I know it wasn't easy leaving the way you did." "It was necessary," Cass replied. "I know, but it took courage." The comment surprised her. In all the years of family drama, Margot had remained carefully neutral. This was the first time she'd expressed any opinion about Cass's choice to leave. Lunch was served buffet-style on the patio. Premium cuts of meat, gourmet salads, expensive wine, everything designed to impress. Cass accepted a plate and found herself seated at a table with Lance and several cousins she remembered from childhood. "So, Cass," said her cousin Jake, "I hear you're in finance now. Financial planning. That must be lucrative. Lance mentioned you have a beautiful house in Bloomington." Cass glanced at Lance, who was studying his potato salad with intense concentration. "I do well enough." "Real estate's expensive down there. What did you pay, if you don't mind me asking?" The question was casual, but Cass sensed an undercurrent. "I mind." Jake laughed uncomfortably. "Just curious. We're thinking about investing in rental properties." "You should talk to a real estate agent." The deflection was smooth but firm. Cass had learned early in her career that financial privacy was essential. People who knew your worth always wanted a piece of it. Conversation moved to safer topics. Jobs, weather, local politics. But Cass noticed the glances, the whispered comments when they thought she wasn't looking. Something was brewing beneath the surface of this forced family reunion. After lunch, Martin called for attention. He stood by the grill with a beer in hand, looking every inch the successful patriarch. "I want to thank everyone for coming today. Family is everything, and it means the world to Dolores and me to have everyone together." His gaze found Cass, especially those we haven't seen in far too long. Polite applause. "A few hear us from the uncles. As some of you know, Lance has been going through a rough patch lately. Job market's tough, especially for young people starting out. But that's what family is, for supporting each other through difficult times." Cass felt her stomach tighten. Here it comes. "We've all been doing our part to help Lance get back on his feet. Uncle Ray gave him work last summer. Aunt Margot helped with his rent for a few months. Even cousin Jake found him some construction jobs." The message was clear. Everyone contributed except Cass. It got me thinking about what family really means, about how we support each other, sacrifice for each other, share in each other's success. Martin's eyes locked onto Cass's. "Some people seem to think success is an individual achievement, that what you earn belongs only to you." A few murmurs of agreement from the crowd. Cass realized she was being set up. "But I believe everything we achieve is built on the foundation our family provides. The love, the support, the values that shape us into the people we become." Martin raised his beer. "To family, and to remembering where we come from." More applause, louder this time. Cass sat perfectly still, processing what had just happened. Her father had essentially accused her of selfishness in front of 30 relatives. The barbecue wasn't a reunion, it was a public shaming. "What do you think, Cass?" Martin asked. "Don't you think family should come first?" Every eye in the backyard focused on her. The smart play would be to deflect, make non-committal noises about family values, and leave as soon as possible. But Cass had never been good at playing it safe. "I think families should treat each other with respect," she said clearly. "I think parents should support all their children, not just the ones they consider valuable. And I think people who've never sacrificed anything for anyone else shouldn't lecture others about family loyalty." The silence was deafening. Martin's face reddened. while Dolores looked mortified. "That's not fair," Lance said suddenly. "We always supported you." Cass turned to face him. "Really? When?" You lived in our house. We fed you, clothed you." "I fed myself. I bought my own clothes with money I earned working 40 hours a week while going to high school." Her voice remained calm, but steel crept into her tone. "You took 40% of my earnings for household expenses while giving me nothing in return." "We gave you a home," Dolores protested. "You gave me an attic, with no heat in winter and no air conditioning in summer. Lance got the nice bedroom with the attached bathroom. Lance was younger. Lance was bigger, stronger, and 3 years closer to college age. But he got everything because he was the golden boy, and I was just the mouth you had to feed." Uncle Ray spoke up. "That's enough. You're being disrespectful." "I'm being honest. There's a difference." Martin stepped forward, his face now purple with rage. "Your independence has ruined Lance's chances. You made us look like failures as parents." The accusation hung in the air like smoke. Cass felt something shift inside her chest, not surprise, exactly, but a crystallization of understanding. This was why they'd invited her, not for reconciliation, but for blame. "My independence ruined nothing," she said, standing up. "Your favoritism ruined everything. Your decision to put all your resources behind one child while treating the other like an indentured servant. Your complete inability to see that Lance's failures are his own responsibility, not mine. You think you're so much better than us," Dolores said, tears in her eyes. "I think I'm different than you, and thank God for that." Cass picked up her purse and walked toward the house. Behind her, voices erupted in angry confusion. Someone called her name, but she didn't turn around. She was almost to her car when Lance caught up with her. "Cass, wait." She turned to face him. "What?" "This doesn't have to be how it ends." "Yes, it does. This is exactly how it has to end. We're family. No, we're people who happen to share DNA. That's all we've ever been." She got in her car and drove away without looking back. Behind her, the Harlow family barbecue continued without its guest of honor. 3 weeks later, a process server appeared at her office door with an envelope that would change everything. The law offices of Bradley, Kim, and Associates occupied 3 floors of a downtown Indianapolis high-rise. Cass sat in the reception area, studying the oil paintings and leather furniture that spoke of old money and expensive victories. Her attorney, Jordan Fisk, had insisted on meeting here rather than in the courthouse for the initial discovery session. "They want to intimidate you," Jordan had explained. "Big firm, fancy offices, team of lawyers. Don't let it work." Jordan appeared beside her chair, looking like she'd stepped out of a legal thriller. Tall, sharp-suited, with silver hair pulled back in a severe bun and eyes that missed nothing. She specialized in civil rights and property law, with a particular talent for dismantling frivolous lawsuits. Jordan asked, "As I'll ever be." They were led to a conference room where 4 people waited around a polished mahogany table. Martin and Dolores sat on one side, looking uncomfortable in their formal clothes. Lance slouched in his chair, wearing a suit that hung poorly on his frame. Their attorney, Robert Bradley himself, commanded the head of the table like a general reviewing troops. Bradley was exactly what Cass had expected. Silver-haired, expensively dressed, with the kind of smooth confidence that came from decades of winning cases through superior resources rather than superior arguments. "Ms. Harlow," Bradley said, rising to shake her hand. "Thank you for coming. I hope we can resolve this matter efficiently." "That depends on what you consider resolution," Jordan replied coolly. They took their seats across from the Harlows. Cass kept her expression neutral, though seeing her family in this context felt surreal. 3 people she'd shared a house with for 15 years, now sitting across from her like enemies. Bradley opened a thick folder. As outlined in our complaint, my clients are seeking partial ownership of property located at 742 Elm Street in Bloomington, Indiana. Said property was purchased by the defendant using resources that rightfully belong to the plaintiff family. Explain that, Jordan said. The defendant's ability to purchase said property stems directly from advantages provided by her family during her formative years. Educational foundation, moral guidance, and direct financial support created the platform from which she launched her career. Cass almost laughed. The rewriting of history was breathtaking in its audacity. Educational foundation. Jordan consulted her notes. My client worked full-time throughout high school and received no financial assistance for college. She paid her own tuition, bought her own books, and graduated with honors while supporting herself completely. Nevertheless, Bradley continued smoothly, the foundational years provided by the Harlow family created the character and work ethic that enabled her subsequent success. My clients are seeking equitable distribution of the benefits derived from their investment. What investment? Cass spoke for the first time. What exactly did you invest in me? Martin shifted uncomfortably. We raised you, fed you, clothed you, gave you a place to live. I paid rent. I bought my own food after age 15. I bought my own clothes with money I earned working 40 hours a week. We provided stability, Dolores added weakly. You provided chaos, favoritism, emotional abuse disguised as family dynamics. Bradley held up a hand. Let's keep this professional. The fact remains that Ms. Harlow benefited from 18 years of family support. 15 years, Cass corrected. I left when I was 15. Even so, those formative years created the foundation for everything that followed. Without that foundation, she would not have achieved her current level of success. Jordan leaned forward. Are you seriously arguing that providing basic necessities to a minor child creates a lifetime claim on that child's earnings? I'm arguing that family equity extends beyond simple financial transactions. The Harlow family made sacrifices to ensure Cassidy's development. Now that she has achieved success, basic fairness demands she share that success with the family who made it possible. What sacrifices? Cass asked. Be specific. The room fell silent. Bradley consulted his papers while the Harlows exchanged nervous glances. Finally, Lance spoke up. They always made sure you had what you needed. Such as food, clothes, a place to sleep. Legal requirements for any parent. What else? Another long pause. Lance's confidence was evaporating under direct questioning. They always encouraged you. Cass turned to face him fully. When? Give me one specific example of encouragement. You know they wanted you to succeed. No, I know they wanted you to succeed. They made that very clear every day of my childhood. Cass kept her voice level, professional. They told me repeatedly that Lance was the future of the family and I should just manage. They took 40% of my earnings from age 15 while giving me nothing in return. They demanded I sacrifice my college savings to pay for Lance's sports equipment. That's not how it happened. Dolores protested. Then tell me how it happened. Dolores looked to Martin for support, but he was staring at the table. The silence stretched uncomfortably. Bradley cleared his throat. Perhaps we could focus on the current situation rather than relitigating family dynamics. The family dynamics are the current situation, Jordan said. You're claiming my client owes your client's money based on their alleged support during her childhood. We're establishing that no such support existed. There's more to family support than financial transactions, Bradley insisted, such as emotional support, guidance, the intangible benefits of growing up in a stable family environment. Cass looked at her parents. Martin was still avoiding eye contact, while Dolores dabbed at her eyes with a tissue. Lance slumped in his chair like a scolded child. Emotional support, she repeated. From people who told me I was average, ordinary, and taking up space. Guidance from parents who actively discouraged my academic ambitions because they might interfere with Lance's athletic career. Stable environment in a house where I was treated like hired help. "You're exaggerating," Martin said quietly. "Am I? Do you remember telling me that Lance would take the family forward and I should just manage?" Martin's face reddened. That was taken out of context. What context makes that statement acceptable? No answer. Jordan opened her own folder. "Let's talk about the specific claims in your complaint. You're seeking half the value of my client's house, approximately $185,000. Based on what calculation?" Bradley shuffled through his papers. "Equitable distribution of family assets." "What family assets?" "Mr. and Mrs. Harlow. What is the current value of your family home?" Martin mumbled something inaudible. "I'm sorry, could you repeat that?" $300,000, he said more clearly. "And how much of that value are you willing to share with my client?" That's different." "How is it different?" "We earned that house. We worked for it. Just like my client worked for her house." Bradley intervened. "The situations aren't comparable. My clients provided the foundation that enabled Ms. Harlow's success." "And what foundation did my client provide for your client's success?" "I don't understand the question." "Mr. Martin Harlow, what is your current occupation?" Martin shifted uncomfortably. "I'm retired." "Retired from what?" "Manufacturing. I was a floor supervisor at Peterson Industries." "For how many years?" 28 years. "And Mrs. Harlow?" "I worked part-time at the school district," Dolores said. "Food service." "For how many years?" 15 years. "Mr. Lance Harlow?" Lance straightened slightly. "I do construction work." "Steady employment?" "It varies, depending on available projects." Jordan made notes. "So none of you has achieved the level of financial success my client has reached." "Success isn't just about money," Bradley said. "Your lawsuit is entirely about money. You're claiming my client owes your clients $185,000 based on their alleged contribution to her success. I'm trying to understand what that contribution consisted of." The question hung in the air. Bradley consulted with his clients in whispered conversation while Jordan waited patiently. Finally, Bradley spoke. "The contribution consisted of providing a stable home environment during Ms. Harlow's formative years." Define stable. "A two-parent household with consistent values and expectations." Cass felt her temper stir. "Consistent values like favoritism and exploitation." "Your Honor," Bradley began, then caught himself. They weren't in court yet. "My client provided housing, food, clothing, and guidance for 15 years. And my client provided 40% of her earnings, free babysitting services, and complete financial independence from age 15 onward," Jordan countered. "If we're calculating contributions to family welfare, my client provided more than she received." "That's ridiculous," Lance said suddenly. "She was part of the family. She was supposed to contribute." "Contribute to what?" Cass asked. "Your sports equipment, your college fund, your future, while mine was dismissed as impossible." "You always acted like you were better than us." "I acted like I deserved the same consideration you received, which apparently made me delusional." The room erupted in multiple conversations. Martin tried to explain something to Bradley, while Dolores cried quietly into her tissue. Lance glared at Cass with undisguised resentment. Jordan waited for the chaos to subside. "Let me be clear about something. My client doesn't owe your clients anything. She left home at 15 and has supported herself completely since then. She owes no one an explanation for her success or a share of what she's earned. We're family, Dolores said through her tears. Families don't sue each other for money, Cass replied. We wouldn't have to sue if you'd just help your brother. Help him do what? I offered him advice on finding work. He wanted cash with no strings attached. What's wrong with helping family? Nothing. When it's actually family. Bradley regained control of the meeting. My clients have legitimate concerns about equitable treatment within the family structure. Your clients have buyer's remorse, Jordan said. They invested everything in one child and ignored the other. Now that their investment has failed and their ignored child has succeeded, they want a do-over. Lance didn't fail, Martin said defensively. What would you call it? Cass asked. You spent thousands on his sports equipment, training, coaching. You sacrificed my education and financial security for his athletic career. He got injured, lost his scholarship, dropped out of college, and now works sporadically in construction. She paused. If that's not failure, what is? He's going through a rough patch. He's 24 years old. The rough patch is his life. Lance stood up abruptly. I don't have to listen to this. Actually, you do, Jordan said. You filed the lawsuit. Discovery is part of the process. She's just trying to make me look bad. I don't have to try, Cass said. Your choices speak for themselves. Bradley called for a recess. The Harlows huddled in the hallway while Cass and Jordan remained in the conference room. How do you think it's going? Cass asked. Better than expected. They have no case, but Bradley's hoping you'll settle to avoid the embarrassment of a public trial. Jordan closed her folder. The question is whether you want to fight this or make it go away. What would making it go away cost? Probably $50,000 to $75,000. Enough to feel like they won something, not enough to bankrupt you. Cass considered this. The money wasn't the issue, she could afford to pay them off. But paying would validate their behavior, encourage future demands, and send the message that abuse could be monetized if you waited long enough. I want to fight, she said. It'll be ugly. Family court cases always are, and this one involves 12 years of accumulated resentment. Good. I want it ugly. I want every detail of my childhood in the public record. I want everyone to know exactly what kind of people they are. Jordan smiled, and for the first time it reached her eyes. In that case, we're going to destroy them. The story broke in the Bloomington Herald 3 days after the discovery session. Local family sues daughter over house purchase, read the headline, followed by a sanitized version of the lawsuit that made Cass sound like a heartless daughter who'd abandoned her struggling family. Cass read the article over coffee in her kitchen, noting the careful phrasing that managed to avoid any mention of why she'd left home at 15. The reporter had clearly gotten his information from Bradley's office. Everything was presented from the plaintiff's perspective. Her phone rang. Rita, her old boss from the diner, calling from Indianapolis. Honey, I just saw the paper. Are you okay? I'm fine, Rita. It's just legal nonsense. Legal nonsense that's got your picture on the front page. Rita's voice carried the protective tone Cass remembered from her teenage years. What do they really want? Money. Same thing they've always wanted. After all these years, I thought they'd given up on you. They had, until they found out I'd done well for myself. Rita made a disgusted sound. Some people never change. You need anything? Moral support? Character witness? I kept all those old-time cards from when you worked for me. The offer touched Cass more than she expected. I might take you up on that. You do that. And, honey, don't let them get to you. You earned everything you have. After Rita hung up, Cass scrolled through her messages. Several work colleagues expressing support, a few clients asking if the lawsuit would affect their accounts, and 17 missed calls from numbers she didn't recognize. Reporters probably looking for her side of the story. She was deleting voicemails when someone knocked on her door. Through the window, she saw a man in his 50s wearing work clothes and a hostile expression. Uncle Ray. Cass debated ignoring him, but he'd already seen her through the window. She opened the door but kept the chain engaged. Uncle Ray. Cassidy. His voice carried the same cold disapproval she remembered from childhood. We need to talk. About what? About this lawsuit nonsense. About what you're doing to your family. I'm not doing anything to anyone. They sued me, remember? Because you won't help your brother. Because you're so selfish you can't see past your own bank account. The accusation was delivered with practiced certainty, as if Ray had been rehearsing this speech for days. Come back when you have something intelligent to say, Cass said, starting to close the door. Ray jammed his foot in the gap. I'm not done talking. Yes, you are. Cass stared at him steadily. Remove your foot or I'll call the police. You'd call the cops on your own uncle. I'd call the cops on anyone who tried to force their way into my house. Ray held her gaze for several seconds, then stepped back. But he didn't leave. Your parents sacrificed everything for you kids. Everything. And this is how you repay them. They sacrificed everything for Lance. I was just the backup plan. That's not true. Then where were you when they were taking 40% of my paycheck? Where were you when I was sleeping in an unheated attic while Lance got the master bedroom? Where were you when they told me I was ordinary and should just manage? Ray's certainty wavered. Families aren't perfect, but you don't abandon them. I didn't abandon anyone. I left an abusive situation. Abusive. Ray's voice rose. They fed you, clothed you, put a roof over your head. Legal requirements for any parent. That's not love, it's obligation. You think you're so much better than us, don't you? The question was clearly meant as an insult, but Cass considered it seriously. In some ways, yes. I'm better at setting boundaries. I'm better at recognizing toxic behavior. I'm better at building a life based on my own values rather than other people's expectations. Ray's face reddened. You're a cold, selfish bitch. And you're a bitter old man who's angry that his favorite nephew turned out to be a loser. Cass stepped back. This conversation is over. She closed the door and engaged all 3 locks. Through the window, she watched Ray stand on her porch for several minutes, probably debating whether to ring the bell again. Eventually, he walked away, but not before kicking her flower pot hard enough to crack it. The afternoon brought more visitors. Neighbors curious about the newspaper story, a reporter from Channel 8 wanting an interview, and 2 people she didn't recognize who claimed to be family friends. Cass ignored them all. At 5 o'clock, her doorbell rang again. This time it was Aunt Margot. Cass considered her options. Margot had always been the family diplomat, trying to smooth over conflicts without taking sides. But she'd also been present at the barbecue, listening to Martin's accusations without defending Cass. She opened the door. Aunt Margot. Hi, honey. Can we talk? Margot looked older than Cass remembered, with gray streaking her brown hair and worry lines around her eyes. She carried a covered dish that smelled like her famous chocolate chip cookies. Depends what you want to talk about. The lawsuit, the family, this whole mess. Margot held up the dish. I brought cookies. Your favorites. Despite everything, Cass felt her resolve soften slightly. Margot had been one of the few adults in her childhood who'd shown her consistent kindness. 5 minutes, she said, stepping aside. Margot followed her into the kitchen, setting the cookies on the counter. Beautiful house, Cass. You've done really well for yourself. Thank you. I mean it. I remember when you were 15, working all those jobs, so determined to make something of yourself. I'm proud of how far you've come. The praise felt genuine, which made it more dangerous. Cass had learned to be wary of family members bearing compliments. What do you want, Margot? I want this lawsuit to go away. It's tearing the family apart. The family tore itself apart years ago. This is just making it official. Margot sat down at the kitchen island, looking tired. Your parents aren't perfect. Lord knows they made mistakes with you kids. But they love you, Cass, in their own way. Love doesn't take 40% of a 15-year-old's paycheck. They were struggling financially. Your dad's job barely covered the mortgage, and your mom's work was part-time. They needed the help. Then they should have asked for help, not demanded it as tribute to the golden child. Lance wasn't the golden child. Yes, he was. Cass cut her off. Every decision in that house was made based on what was best for Lance. Every resource went to Lance. Every conversation centered on Lance's future, while mine was dismissed as unrealistic. Margot was quiet for a moment. You're right. They did favor him, but they thought he had the best chance of success. Athletic scholarships, maybe a professional career. They were trying to maximize the family's opportunities by sacrificing one child for another, by making hard choices with limited resources. Cass studied her aunt's face. Do you really believe that? I believe they did what they thought was best at the time. That's not the same thing. Another silence. Margot picked at the edge of the cookie dish, clearly struggling with something. What aren't you telling me? Cass asked. There are things you don't know. About the family finances, about why your parents made the choices they did. Such as, your father had gambling debts, has gambling debts, poker games at the plant, football betting, trips to the casino. He's lost thousands over the years. The revelation hit Cass like cold water. How much? I don't know exactly, but enough that they refinanced the house twice. Enough that they're still struggling even though they're both retired. Is that why they're suing me? To pay gambling debts? Partly, but also because they genuinely believe you owe them something. They raised you, and in their minds that creates an obligation. Cass processed this information. Her father's gambling explained a lot the constant financial stress, the desperate focus on Lance's potential earnings, the resentment toward her independence. Does Lance know about the gambling? I don't think so. Your parents have been hiding it for years. So they stole from his college fund to pay debts. Margot nodded reluctantly, among other things. And they're still blaming me for his failures. They need someone to blame. Accepting responsibility would mean admitting they destroyed their son's future with their own poor choices. The conversation was moving into dangerous territory. Margot was revealing family secrets, which meant she wanted something significant in return. What do you want from me? Cass asked directly. I want you to settle the lawsuit, not because they deserve it, but because fighting it will hurt everyone involved. Including you. Including me. Your Uncle Jack and I have been helping support your parents for the past 2 years. If this lawsuit gets ugly, if all the family secrets come out, it'll affect everyone. There it was. Margot wasn't concerned about justice or family harmony. She was worried about financial exposure. How much have you given them? Enough that we can't afford to lose it. Cass felt a familiar anger building. Once again, family members were asking her to sacrifice her interests for someone else's poor choices. That sounds like a problem you should discuss with your financial advisor, not me. Cass, please, be reasonable. I am being reasonable. I'm defending myself against a frivolous lawsuit filed by people who treated me like garbage for 15 years. They're not evil people. They're just limited, flawed, like all of us. Some flaws are more damaging than others. Margot stood up, realizing she wasn't making progress. Think about it, okay? Think about whether winning this lawsuit is worth destroying what's left of the family. What's left of the family destroyed itself a long time ago. After Margot left, Cass sat in her kitchen thinking about gambling debts and family secrets. The new information changed nothing about the lawsuit, but it explained the desperation behind it. Her parents weren't just greedy. They were financially cornered, which made them more dangerous than she'd realized at Jordan's office, occupied the top floor of a converted warehouse in downtown Bloomington, with exposed brick walls and industrial fixtures that spoke of creative repurposing rather than corporate tradition. Cass sat across from Jordan's desk, reviewing the latest developments in the case. "Bradley's pushing for mediation," Jordan said, sliding a legal document across the desk. "Says his clients want to avoid the emotional trauma of a public trial. What they want to avoid is having their dirty laundry aired in court." "Exactly, which means we're in a strong position." Jordan leaned back in her chair. "I've been digging into their financial history, and what I've found is interesting." Cass looked up from the mediation request. "Such as?" "Your parents have refinanced their house 3 times in the past 10 years. Each time, they pulled out equity and burned through it within 18 months. Gambling debts." "How did you know?" "Aunt Margot told me. She's been helping support them financially." Jordan made a note. "That explains the pattern. But here's the interesting part: the timing of the refinances correlates with major educational expenses. Lance's college costs." "Initially, yes. But look at this." Jordan pulled out a spreadsheet. The first refinance happened in 2010, right when Lance started college. They pulled out $40,000 for tuition and expenses. "That's what I thought. But Lance dropped out in 2012, 2 years later. So where did the money go for those 2 years?" Cass studied the timeline. "Dad's gambling. Gets better. They refinanced again in 2013, another $30,000. And again in 2016, $25,000. But Lance wasn't in school during either of those periods. So they stole his college fund to pay gambling debts. Repeatedly. And here's the kicker: they've been telling everyone, including Lance, that they exhausted their savings paying for his education." The implications were staggering. Not only had her parents destroyed Lance's educational opportunities with their poor choices, they'd been lying about it for years. "Does Lance know?" "I doubt it. The mortgage records aren't public, and they've been very careful to maintain the fiction that they sacrificed everything for his education." Cass felt a complex mix of emotions. Vindication that her family's financial problems weren't her fault. Anger that they were still lying about the reasons for Lance's failures. And, surprisingly, a small amount of pity for Lance, who'd been manipulated as much as she had. "This changes the case," she said. "Completely. Their financial security for your benefit when they actually sacrificed it for gambling debts. And they can't claim Lance failed because you took opportunities away from him when they took his opportunities away themselves." Jordan's phone buzzed. She glanced at the screen and frowned. "Speak of the devil. Bradley wants to schedule another discovery session. Says he has new evidence." "What kind of new evidence?" "He won't say, but he sounds confident, which makes me nervous." They scheduled the meeting for the following Friday. In the meantime, Jordan continued digging into the Harlow family finances while Cass tried to maintain her normal work routine despite the constant media attention. The second discovery session took place in the same conference room, but the atmosphere was different. Bradley seemed more confident, while the Harlows looked like people who'd been coached extensively. "Thank you for coming," Bradley began. "I believe we can resolve this matter efficiently with some new information that's come to light." "I'm listening," Jordan said. Bradley opened his briefcase and pulled out a folder. "My clients have provided documentation of the financial support they provided to Ms. Harlow during her childhood and adolescence." He slid several papers across the table. Cass recognized them immediately: receipts, bank statements, and other records from her teenage years. "As you can see," Bradley continued, "the Harlows provided substantial financial support for Ms. Harlow's education, health care, and personal expenses." Jordan examined the documents. "These are receipts for basic necessities: food, clothing, school supplies, standard parental obligations." They represent significant financial investment in Ms. Harlow's development. They represent the legal minimum required to avoid child neglect charges. Bradley pulled out another document. This bank statement shows a college savings account established for Ms. Harlow in 2008. Cass leaned forward to look at the statement. It showed an account in her name with a balance of $3,247. I never had a college savings account, she said. Your parents opened it on your behalf, Bradley replied. Unfortunately, circumstances required them to borrow against it temporarily. Borrow against it how? Martin cleared his throat. We had to use some of the money for family expenses. Emergency situations. What kind of emergencies? Medical bills. Home repairs. Things you probably don't remember. Cass stared at the bank statement. The account had been opened in January 2008 and closed in March 2009. Every withdrawal was labeled transfer to checking. This account existed for 14 months, she said, and you emptied it within the first year. We intended to repay it, Dolores said defensively. With what money? You were already taking 40% of my earnings for household expenses. We needed the funds for Lance's training costs, Martin admitted. The honesty was refreshing, if damaging to their case. Bradley shot Martin a warning look. The point is, Bradley said hastily, my clients made significant financial sacrifices for both their children. The current lawsuit merely seeks to balance those sacrifices equitably. Jordan had been making notes throughout the exchange. Mr. Bradley, are your clients claiming they established this account with their own money? Yes, of course. Then why does this deposit slip show the initial funding came from a tax refund in Ms. Harlow's name? Bradley examined the slip Jordan had produced. I'm not sure what you're referring to. This. Jordan pointed to a line item on the deposit slip. Federal tax refund, Cassidy Harlow, $3,247. The exact amount shown as the account balance. The room went silent. Cass realized what had happened. Her parents had intercepted her tax refund and deposited it in an account they controlled, then spent the money and claimed it as their own investment in her future. They stole my tax refund, she said quietly. That's a serious accusation, Bradley warned. It's a factual statement. That money belonged to me. They deposited it in an account I didn't know existed, spent it on Lance's expenses, and are now claiming it as proof of their financial sacrifice. Martin's face had gone pale. We were going to tell you about the account. When? When you graduated. We thought it would be a nice surprise. A surprise account that you emptied without my knowledge or permission. Lance spoke up for the first time. I didn't know about any of this. Cass turned to look at him. For the first time in years, she saw something other than resentment in his expression. Confusion, maybe. Possibly even embarrassment. What did they tell you about your college funding? She asked. That they'd saved what they could, but it wasn't enough for 4 years. That's why I had to take out loans. And when you couldn't afford the loans, they said they'd helped as much as possible, that the money had run out. Cass looked at her parents. Tell him about the refinances. What refinances? Lance asked. Dolores started crying again. Martin stared at the table as if it might provide answers. Tell him about the $40,000 you borrowed against the house in 2010, Cass continued, and the $30,000 in 2013, and the $25,000 in 2016. Lance looked confused. What are you talking about? Jordan intervened. Your parents have refinanced their house 3 times since you started college, extracting approximately $95,000 in equity. None of that money went to your education. Where did it go? Lance asked. The question hung in the air. Martin and Dolores looked at each other, then at Bradley, then anywhere except at their son. Dad. Lance's voice was quiet. Where did the money go? There were expenses, Martin said finally. Things you don't understand. What kind of expenses cost $95,000? Another long silence. Cass felt an unexpected surge of sympathy for Lance. He was finally seeing his parents clearly, and the view was devastating. Gambling, she said quietly. Lance turned to stare at her. What? Your father has gambling debts. Has had them for years. They didn't spend your college money on family emergencies. They spent it paying bookies and covering casino losses. Is that true? Lance asked his parents. Bradley tried to regain control. These allegations are unsubstantiated. Are they? Jordan pulled out another folder. Because I have documentation of frequent withdrawals from the refinance accounts at 3 different casinos, plus payments to individuals with criminal records related to illegal gambling operations. She spread the evidence across the table. Bank records, transaction histories, even photographs of Martin at casino ATMs. Lance stared at the documents with growing horror. You destroyed my college fund for gambling debts. It wasn't like that, Martin protested. I was trying to win money to help the family by gambling away my education. It was supposed to be temporary. I thought I could win it back. How long has this been going on? Lance, please. How long? Martin's shoulders sagged in defeat. Since before you were born. The confession hit Lance like a physical blow. He looked around the table at his parents, then at Cass, then at the evidence of his father's addiction scattered across the mahogany surface. Everything you told me about college funding was a lie. We did our best. Your best was gambling away my future while blaming Cass for not helping out enough. Lance stood up abruptly. I need some air. He left the conference room, and through the floor-to-ceiling windows, they could see him pacing on the sidewalk outside. Bradley cleared his throat. Perhaps we should take a recess. Perhaps you should explain to your clients that they have no case, Jordan replied. They can't claim they sacrificed financially for Ms. Harlow's benefit when they actually sacrificed their children's futures for gambling debts. They can't claim she owes them money when they stole her tax refund and spent it on casino expenses. The lawsuit isn't just about money. Yes, it is. It's entirely about money. Money they don't have because your client is a gambling addict who destroyed his family's financial security. Cass watched her parents through the window. They looked smaller somehow, diminished by the exposure of truths they'd been hiding for years. I want to add counterclaims, she told Jordan. What kind of counterclaims? Theft of my tax refund, harassment, emotional distress, whatever else you can think of. Bradley objected. Countersuits will only escalate. Good, Cass interrupted. I want this escalated. I want every detail of my childhood in the public record. I want everyone to know exactly what kind of people they are. Through the window, she could see Lance talking on his phone. His gestures were angry, frustrated, probably calling friends or other relatives. Trying to process what he'd learned 20 minutes later, he returned to the conference room. His face was calm, but Cass could see the storm behind his eyes. I have some questions, he announced. Lance, Martin began, let's talk about this at home. No, I want answers now. Lance sat down and looked directly at his parents. Did you really take Cass's tax refund? The money was for the family. Did you take it without telling her? Martin nodded reluctantly. Did you really spend my college money on gambling? Another nod. Have you been lying about family finances for my entire life? We were trying to protect you. Have you been lying? Yes, Dolores whispered. Lance turned to Cass. I owe you an apology. The word surprised her. For what? For everything. For believing their version of events. For blaming you for problems you didn't create. For participating in this lawsuit. Lance, Martin warned, think about what you're saying. I am thinking. For the first time in years, I'm actually thinking. Lance looked around the table. This lawsuit is garbage. Cass doesn't owe us anything. If anything, we owe her. You don't understand the full situation. I understand that you destroyed my future and blamed my sister for it. I understand that you've been lying to me for years while asking me to participate in harassing the only person in this family who actually made something of herself. Lance stood up again. I'm withdrawing from the lawsuit. Bradley leaned forward. Mr. Harlow, I strongly advise against making any hasty decisions. It's not hasty. It's overdue. Lance looked at Cass one more time. I'm sorry, Cass, for all of it. He walked out of the conference room and didn't come back. Jordan's office had been transformed into a war room. Legal documents covered every surface, creating a paper trail that told the complete story of the Harlow family dysfunction. Cass sat at the conference table, reviewing depositions while Jordan finalized their countersuit strategy. Lance's withdrawal changes everything, Jordan said, highlighting sections of legal text. He was their primary witness, the supposed victim of your selfishness. Without him, they have no emotional foundation for their claims. What about his testimony from the first session? Legally worthless now that he's recanted. In fact, it helps us. His admission that he was wrong makes your parents look like manipulators who turn their children against each other. Cass studied the timeline Jordan had created on the whiteboard. Years of financial transactions, family conflicts, and legal maneuvering reduced to bullet points and dates. Tell me about the countersuits. 5 separate claims. Jordan counted them off on her fingers. Theft of your tax refund. Defamation through their public statements about the lawsuit. Harassment via the original filing. Intentional infliction of emotional distress based on your childhood treatment. And fraudulent conveyance for attempting to claim ownership of property they had no legal right to. What are we asking for? Full dismissal of their original claims, plus damages totaling $75,000. Enough to hurt, but not enough to bankrupt them. The strategy was elegant. Rather than simply defending against the lawsuit, they were going on the offensive. Cass would force her parents to defend their behavior in open court, with every detail of their family's dysfunction exposed to public scrutiny. How will they respond? Bradley will try to settle. This case is becoming a public relations nightmare for his firm. Big corporate lawyers don't like being associated with frivolous family disputes. Jordan's prediction proved accurate. 2 days later, Bradley called requesting an emergency settlement conference. They met at Bradley's office, but the power dynamic had shifted completely. Bradley looked harried, his usual polish replaced by defensive anxiety. Martin and Dolores sat hunched in their chairs like defendants awaiting sentencing. My clients are prepared to be reasonable, Bradley began without preamble. Define reasonable, Jordan replied. They're willing to drop their original claims in exchange for Ms. Harlow dropping her countersuits. That's not reasonable. That's surrender. The alternative is a public trial that will be painful for everyone involved. Cass leaned forward. Painful for whom? I'm not the one hiding gambling addiction and child abuse. Now see here. Martin started. No, you see here. Cass's voice cut through the room like ice. You sued me for being successful. You claimed I owed you money because you provided basic parental care. You dragged Lance into your delusions and turned him against me. Now you want to walk away like nothing happened. We're family, Dolores said weakly. No, we're not. Family doesn't steal tax refunds. Family doesn't take 40% of a teenager's wages. Family doesn't sacrifice one child's future for another's hobby. Cass stood up. You want to settle? Here are my terms. She pulled out a document Jordan had prepared. Full public apology in the Herald and Channel 8. Admission that your original lawsuit was frivolous and motivated by financial desperation. Payment of all my legal fees. and a written acknowledgement that you have no claim, legal or moral, to any of my assets. Bradley scanned the document, his face growing pale. These terms are excessive. These terms are justice. My clients can't afford. Then they shouldn't have sued me. Martin finally spoke. What about family? What about forgiveness? Cass looked at him steadily. What about accountability? What about consequences? We made mistakes. You made choices, bad choices that hurt your children and destroyed your family. I'm not responsible for fixing the damage you caused. The settlement conference lasted 3 hours, but Cass never wavered from her position. She wanted total victory, complete vindication, and public acknowledgement of her parents' behavior. In the end, Bradley convinced his clients to accept most of her terms. The public apology was reduced to a simple retraction in the legal notices section, but everything else remained. Full payment of legal fees, admission of frivolous filing, and permanent waiver of any future claims. One more thing, Cass said as Bradley prepared the final documents. If either of them contacts me again for any reason, I'll file for a restraining order and pursue additional harassment charges. That seems extreme. It seems necessary. They've proven they can't respect boundaries or accept responsibility for their actions. This is the only way to ensure they leave me alone. 2 weeks later, the settlement was finalized. The lawsuit was dismissed with prejudice, meaning it could never be refiled. The Harlows paid $23,000 in legal fees and published a brief retraction acknowledging that their claims were unfounded. But Cass wasn't finished. The courtroom was smaller than Cass had expected, with simple wooden benches and fluorescent lighting that gave everything a harsh, institutional quality. Judge Patricia Hoffman presided from behind a modest desk rather than an imposing judicial bench, creating an atmosphere more like a business meeting than a dramatic legal proceeding. Despite the settlement, several related matters required judicial approval. The dismissal of the original lawsuit, enforcement of the restraining order provisions, and formal recording of the Harlows' admission that their claims were frivolous. Cass sat at the plaintiff's table with Jordan, watching Bradley shuffle through papers with obvious discomfort. At the defendant's table, Martin and Dolores looked like people attending their own funeral. They'd aged visibly over the past month, the stress of public exposure taking its toll. Lance wasn't present. According to Jordan's sources, he'd moved out of his parents' house and was staying with friends while looking for steady work. The revelation of his father's gambling addiction had shattered his relationship with his parents, creating another casualty of their poor choices. Case number 2024, CV 8847, Judge Hoffman announced. Harlow versus Harlow. Mr. Bradley, I understand we have a settlement agreement to review. Bradley stood up, clearly uncomfortable. Yes, Your Honor. The parties have reached a mutually acceptable resolution. Define mutually acceptable, Counselor. From what I've read in the filings, this case involves some serious allegations of family misconduct. The settlement addresses all outstanding issues between the parties. Judge Hoffman reviewed the documents, her expression growing increasingly skeptical. Mr. Bradley, your clients sued their daughter for partial ownership of her house based on claimed family investment in her success. Is that correct? Yes, Your Honor, but... And discovery revealed that they actually stole her tax refund, took 40% of her teenage wages, and spent their son's college fund on gambling debts. Bradley shifted uncomfortably. The financial arrangements within the family were complex. They seem quite simple to me. Parents exploited their daughter financially, favored their son dramatically, then sued the daughter when she achieved success without their help. Judge Hoffman looked directly at Martin and Dolores. Is that an accurate summary? Dolores started crying softly. Martin stared at his hands. Mr. Harlow, I'm speaking to you. Martin looked up reluctantly. We did our best with the resources we had. Your best included stealing your daughter's tax refund. We intended to repay it, With money, you were gambling away at casinos. The question hung in the air. Martin's silence was answer enough. Judge Hoffman turned to Cass. Ms. Harlow, you're satisfied with this settlement agreement? Yes, Your Honor. You understand that once I approve it, this matter is concluded? You can't pursue additional claims related to your childhood treatment. I understand, and I'm satisfied with the resolution. Very well. Judge Hoffman signed the settlement order. The original lawsuit is dismissed with prejudice. The defendants are ordered to pay all legal fees as specified in the agreement, and I'm approving the restraining order provisions that prohibit future contact. She looked up from the documents. Let me be clear about something. This court has seen many family disputes, but few as disturbing as this one. Parents have legal and moral obligations to their children. Those obligations don't create lifetime claims on their children's success. Judge Hoffman's gaze shifted to Martin and Dolores. You failed your daughter in fundamental ways. You treated her like an employee rather than a child. You sacrificed her well-being for your son's perceived advantages. And when your poor choices led to failure, you blamed her for succeeding despite your neglect. The courtroom was dead silent. Even the court reporter seemed to pause in her transcription. The restraining order provisions in this settlement are necessary and appropriate. You've proven you can't respect your daughter's autonomy or accept responsibility for your actions. Stay away from her. Don't contact her. Don't ask relatives to contact her on your behalf. If you violate these provisions, you'll face criminal charges. Judge Hoffman banged her gavel. Case dismissed. Court is adjourned. As people filed out of the courtroom, Cass felt a sense of completion she hadn't expected. The legal victory was satisfying, but the judge's public condemnation of her parents' behavior was even more meaningful. An objective authority had reviewed the evidence and confirmed what Cass had known for years. She was the victim, not the villain. In the hallway outside the courtroom, extended family members clustered in small groups. Uncle Ray glared at Cass as she passed, but said nothing. Aunt Margot looked conflicted, caught between loyalty to her sister and recognition of the truth. Cousin Jake approached cautiously. Cass, can I talk to you for a minute? She stopped, curious about what he might say. I wanted to apologize. For my family, I mean. We heard the testimony, saw the evidence. We had no idea how bad things were for you growing up. Some of you had ideas. You just chose not to act on them. Jake nodded sadly. You're right. We were cowards. We let family loyalty override common decency. And now we know better. Margot's cutting off financial support to your parents. Ray's refusing to give your dad any more work. The family's pretty much split down the middle. The information didn't surprise Cass. Secrets had a way of destroying the relationships they were meant to protect. By hiding Martin's gambling addiction and abusive treatment of Cass, the family had enabled years of dysfunction. What about Lance? She asked. He's struggling, angry at your parents, ashamed of his part in the lawsuit, trying to figure out who he is without their manipulation. Jake paused. He asked me to tell you he's sorry for everything. I got that message. He also said he understands if you never want to see him again, but if you ever change your mind, he'd like the chance to make things right. Cass considered this. Lance's apology had seemed genuine, and his withdrawal from the lawsuit had been crucial to her victory. But forgiveness wasn't something she was prepared to consider. Tell him I heard the message. That's it. That's all I have to give. Jake nodded and walked away. Around the courthouse, the Harlow family continued their fragmented conversations. Trying to process the implosion of relationships they'd thought were permanent, Cass walked to her car without looking back. 6 months after the lawsuit ended. Cass stood in the kitchen of her new house, brewing coffee and planning her day. The house was larger than her previous home, with a chef's kitchen, master suite, and home office that overlooked a private garden. She'd paid cash, as always, after selling the Bloomington property for a significant profit. The sale had been strategic rather than necessary. The Bloomington house held too many memories of family conflict and legal battles. This new house, in a different city with no connection to her past, represented a complete fresh start. Her business had grown during the lawsuit publicity, counterintuitively. Potential clients admired someone who'd stood up to family exploitation and won. Her reputation for financial independence and strong boundaries attracted people who valued those qualities in an advisor. The doorbell rang, interrupting her morning routine. Through the window, she saw a delivery truck and a uniformed driver holding a package. No return address, but the shipping label showed it had come from Indianapolis. Cass signed for the package and carried it inside. The return address, when she found it on a small label, was Lance's name with an address she didn't recognize. Inside the box was a letter and a check for $15,000. The letter was handwritten on plain paper. Cass, I know you probably don't want to hear from me, but I needed to send this. I got a settlement from Dad's insurance company for the college fund he stole. The insurance investigator said what he did constituted fraud, so they paid out the original policy amount. I got that message. He also said he understands if you never want to see him again, but if you ever change your mind, he'd like the chance to make things right. Cass considered this. Lance's apology had seemed genuine, and his withdrawal from the lawsuit had been crucial to her victory. But forgiveness wasn't something she was prepared to consider. Tell him I heard the message. That's it. That's all I have to give. Jake nodded and walked away. Around the courthouse, the Harlow family continued their fragmented conversations. Trying to process the implosion of relationships they'd thought were permanent, Cass walked to her car without looking back. 6 months after the lawsuit ended. Cass stood in the kitchen of her new house, brewing coffee and planning her day. The house was larger than her previous home, with a chef's kitchen, master suite, and home office that overlooked a private garden. She'd paid cash, as always, after selling the Bloomington property for a significant profit. The sale had been strategic rather than necessary. The Bloomington house held too many memories of family conflict and legal battles. This new house, in a different city with no connection to her past, represented a complete fresh start. Her business had grown during the lawsuit publicity, counterintuitively. Potential clients admired someone who'd stood up to family exploitation and won. Her reputation for financial independence and strong boundaries attracted people who valued those qualities in an advisor. The doorbell rang, interrupting her morning routine. Through the window, she saw a delivery truck and a uniformed driver holding a package. No return address, but the shipping label showed it had come from Indianapolis. Cass signed for the package and carried it inside. The return address, when she found it on a small label, was Lance's name with an address she didn't recognize. Inside the box was a letter and a check for $15,000. The letter was handwritten on plain paper. Cass, I know you probably don't want to hear from me, but I needed to send this. I got a settlement from Dad's insurance company for the college fund he stole. The insurance investigator said what he did constituted fraud, so they paid out the original policy amount. This is your share. I calculated 40% of my college expenses, since that's what you paid to the family when we were kids. It's not enough to make up for everything they took from you, but it's what I can afford right now. I'm working steady construction now, living in my own apartment, seeing a counselor about family issues. I'm trying to figure out who I am when I'm not being manipulated by parents who lied about everything that I don't expect forgiveness. I don't even expect a response. I just wanted you to know that I finally understand what really happened in our family, and I'm sorry I was part of it for so long. That Lance Cass read the letter twice, then examined the check. It was legitimate, drawn on a local bank account. Lance had actually calculated her share of family exploitation and sent restitution. She felt nothing. No anger, no gratitude, no desire for reconciliation. The money was meaningless to her now. $15,000 wouldn't change her life. But the gesture suggested Lance might finally be developing the integrity he'd lacked during their childhood. Her phone rang. Rita, calling from Indianapolis. Morning, honey. How's the new house? Perfect. Quiet. Private. Good. You deserve quiet after the year you've had. Rita paused. I'm calling because I heard something you might want to know. About what? Your parents. They're losing the house. Cass set down her coffee cup. Gambling debts. Partly, but also the legal fees from the lawsuit and your Aunt Margot cutting off their financial support. Without her help, they can't make the mortgage payments. Where will they go? Nobody knows. Your Uncle Ray won't take them in. Other relatives are keeping their distance. They made their bed, as my mother used to say. The news should have made Cass feel vindicated, but instead she felt empty. Her parents' destruction was a natural consequence of their choices, not something she'd actively pursued. Justice, perhaps, but hollow justice. What about Lance? Still living on his own, from what I hear. Working steady, keeping to himself. The whole family split apart after the trial. After Rita hung up, Cass sat in her kitchen, processing the information. The Harlow family had completely imploded, parents losing their house, son estranged and struggling, extended family divided by loyalty and disgust. She'd won completely, more thoroughly than she'd ever imagined possible. Oh, why did victory feel so empty? The answer came to her as she was getting ready for work. Victory felt empty because it had always been inevitable. Her parents' destructive patterns had been unsustainable from the beginning. The gambling, the favoritism, the financial exploitation, all of it was destined to collapse eventually. Cass had simply refused to be crushed in the wreckage. That afternoon, she wrote 2 letters. The first was to Lance, acknowledging receipt of the check and noting that she would donate the money to a scholarship fund for teenagers aging out of foster care. Not forgiveness, exactly, but recognition that he was finally taking responsibility for his choices. The second letter was to a real estate agent in Indianapolis, asking for information about distressed properties in her parents' neighborhood. Not because she wanted to help them, but because she was interested in investment opportunities that if Martin and Dolores lost their house to foreclosure, Cass might buy it at auction and convert it to rental property. The irony was too perfect to resist. The house where she'd been treated like hired help could become actual rental income. 6 weeks later, she did exactly that. The auction was held on the courthouse steps, attended by a handful of investors and contractors looking for bargains. Cass bid through a proxy, maintaining her anonymity while acquiring her childhood home for $62,000, roughly half its market value. She hired contractors to gut the interior completely, removing every trace of the family who'd lived there. New flooring, fresh paint, modern appliances, professional landscaping. The transformation was so complete that the house looked like it had been built for different people entirely. The rental income was modest, but steady. Young families, mostly, drawn by the affordable rent and decent neighborhood. People who treated the house with respect and paid their bills on time. Cass never drove by the property or met the tenants. Her management company handled all interactions, sending her monthly reports that she reviewed with the same professional detachment she applied to all her investments. The final piece of her revenge wasn't dramatic or emotional. It was simply the complete erasure of her family's presence from the house where they'd once lived. New owners, new memories, new life built on the foundation of their failure. Martin and Dolores had moved to a trailer park across town, surviving on Social Security and whatever help they could find from relatives who still spoke to them. Cass knew this from Rita, who kept her informed despite her protests that she didn't want to know. Lance had sent one more letter, thanking her for donating the money and updating her on his progress in counseling. He was apparently working through years of manipulation and developing healthier relationships. The letter was mature, reflective, and asked for nothing. Cass filed it with the rest of the lawsuit paperwork and never responded. 3 years after the lawsuit ended, she received a wedding invitation. Lance was marrying a woman named Jennifer, someone he'd met in a support group for adult children of dysfunctional families. The invitation was simple, elegant, and included a handwritten note. I don't expect you to come, but I wanted you to know that I'm building something new. Something based on honesty instead of manipulation. I learned that from watching you. Cass threw the invitation away without responding. Some wounds never healed. Some relationships couldn't be rebuilt. Some betrayals were too fundamental to overcome. But that was fine with her. She'd built a life that required nothing from people who'd proven they couldn't be trusted. Independence wasn't just financial freedom, it was emotional freedom from the chaos other people created on her 30th birthday. Cass sat on the deck of her lakefront house, watching the sunset paint the water in shades of gold and copper. She owned 3 rental properties, managed portfolios worth millions, and had built a reputation as one of the state's most successful financial advisors. More importantly, she'd built a life entirely free from the dysfunction that had defined her childhood. No one could manipulate her, exploit her, or make demands based on imaginary obligations she'd won completely. Not just the lawsuit, but the larger battle for autonomy and self-determination. The wine was excellent, the view was perfect, and tomorrow held nothing but opportunities she created for herself. Some people might call it lonely. Cass called it freedom. She hired contractors to gut the interior completely, removing every trace of the family who'd lived there. New flooring, fresh paint, modern appliances, professional landscaping. The transformation was so complete that the house looked like it had been built for different people entirely. The rental income was modest but steady. Young families, mostly, drawn by the affordable rent and decent neighborhood. People who treated the house with respect and paid their bills on time. Cass never drove by the property or met the tenants. Her management company handled all interactions, sending her monthly reports that she reviewed with the same professional detachment she applied to all her investments. The final piece of her revenge wasn't dramatic or emotional. It was simply the complete erasure of her family's presence from the house where they'd once lived. New owners, new memories, new life built on the foundation of their failure. Martin and Dolores had moved to a trailer park across town, surviving on Social Security and whatever help they could find from relatives who still spoke to them. Cass knew this from Rita, who kept her informed despite her protests that she didn't want to know. Lance had sent one more letter, thanking her for donating the money and updating her on his progress in counseling. He was apparently working through years of manipulation and developing healthier relationships. The letter was mature, reflective, and asked for nothing. Cass filed it with the rest of the lawsuit paperwork and never responded 3 years after the lawsuit ended. She received a wedding invitation. Lance was marrying a woman named Jennifer, someone he'd met in a support group for adult children of dysfunctional families. The invitation was simple, elegant, and included a handwritten note. I don't expect you to come, but I wanted you to know that I'm building something new. Something based on honesty instead of manipulation. I learned that from watching you. Cass threw the invitation away without responding. Some wounds never healed. Some relationships couldn't be rebuilt. Some betrayals were too fundamental to overcome. But that was fine with her. She'd built a life that required nothing from people who'd proven they couldn't be trusted. Independence wasn't just financial freedom, it was emotional freedom from the chaos other people created on her 30th birthday. Cass sat on the deck of her lakefront house, watching the sunset paint the water in shades of gold and copper. She owned 3 rental properties, managed portfolios worth millions, and had built a reputation as one of the state's most successful financial advisors. More importantly, she'd built a life entirely free from the dysfunction that had defined her childhood. No one could manipulate her, exploit her, or make demands based on imaginary obligations she'd won completely. Not just the lawsuit, but the larger battle for autonomy and self-determination. The wine was excellent, the view was perfect, and tomorrow held nothing but opportunities she created for herself. Some people might call it lonely. Cass called it freedom.